What if the most dangerous object ever created was not a weapon, but a book? The Vatican Apostolic Archive, formally established in 1612 by Pope Paul V, holds over 85 linear kilometers of documents. Most are administrative, papal correspondence, land grants, ecclesiastical records. Some were never meant to be read. The Processus Contra Templarios, the trial record of the Knights Templar, compiled in 1307 under Pope Clement V, was sealed by papal decree and held in restricted Vatican custody for nearly 700 years. Its contents weren't published until 2007. Before we go further, we need to define our terms. Forbidden knowledge isn't simply secret knowledge. It's information whose possession or dissemination a governing authority has deemed existentially threatening to social order. The Roman Senate governed for centuries on the authority of the Sibylline books, prophetic texts consulted at moments of crisis. When the originals burned in 83 BCE, the Senate suppressed evidence of that loss and commissioned replacement texts, classifying the substitution to preserve the book's political legitimacy. Distributed custody of dangerous information has real precedent. The U.S. nuclear two-man rule, formalized in the 1960s, requires two separate authorized personnel to independently confirm any launch order. No single official can act alone. It's the same logic applied to knowledge. Structural checks prevent unilateral control. In 1440, the Italian humanist Lorenzo Valla published a forensic analysis of the donation of Constantine, the document the Catholic Church had used for centuries to justify its territorial authority over Western Europe. What Valla found wasn't a weapon, it was a linguistic timeline. The document used Latin vocabulary that didn't exist until 4 centuries after its claimed date of origin. Here's the tension that makes Valla's discovery more than a historical curiosity. The Church's landholdings, its taxation authority, its legal jurisdiction over secular rulers, all of it derived from the donation's claimed legitimacy. Valla's proof didn't just expose the past, it dissolved the present. The Pope placed Valla under investigation by the Inquisition. This is the oldest argument in political philosophy. Plato raised it in 380 BCE, in the Republic, the noble lie. Sometimes, he argued, a governing myth, even a false one, serves the population better than a destabilizing truth. History has answered this question with fire more often than philosophy. The Library of Alexandria, holding an estimated 700,000 scrolls, burned not once, but incrementally across 3 centuries, each time by authorities who feared what certain texts could mobilize. But some archives contain something more immediately dangerous than history, a living map. When the Stasi files were opened in Germany in 1991, they named hundreds of thousands of informants. Many were still alive. Their children were still alive. The Bundesbeauftragte, the agency managing the files, faced immediate pressure. Releasing names in full would expose living people to retribution from the families they had betrayed. Enforcement of forbidden knowledge has always required an institutional apparatus. The Catholic Church's Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the official list of banned books, maintained from 1559 to 1966, was enforced by the Inquisition. Its mandate was explicit: identify, suppress, and where necessary destroy texts whose circulation threatened doctrinal authority. Valla's work appeared on early versions of the list. In the weeks before German reunification in 1990, East German archivists faced a choice that philosophers have debated for millennia without resolution. Destroy the Stasi files and protect hundreds of living informants from immediate social violence. Preserve them and honor the historical record of state surveillance, but expose real people to real consequences. Some files were shredded, most were saved. John Stuart Mill's 1859 harm principle offers one framework: liberty ends where harm to others begins. By that measure, releasing the Stasi files in full wasn't free inquiry. It was a retribution mechanism distributed across a reunified nation. But here's the counterweight. When the Athenian general Themistocles suppressed evidence of Persian bribery within his own ranks in 480 BCE, the short-term stability he purchased collapsed within a decade when the truth emerged anyway. Deferral didn't neutralize the damage. Philosophers call this epistemic cowardice, the deliberate choice to defer a difficult truth indefinitely, framing suppression as protection when it's actually the transfer of risk onto future generations who had no say in the bargain. The clearest real-world example of a document created not for release but for accountability is the Pentagon Papers. In 1967, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara commissioned a classified internal history of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, explicitly to create an honest internal record. It was never intended for the public. When Daniel Ellsberg leaked it in 1971, the Nixon administration argued its release endangered national security. The Supreme Court disagreed. This is what archivists today call a time-locked disclosure. Information preserved not for immediate release, but for conditional release when the power structure it threatens no longer exists to weaponize the response. This isn't a fantasy abstraction. In 1998, the Vatican partially opened Holocaust-era archives, documents suppressed for over 50 years. The disclosure was partial, conditional, and still contested. The same logic that sealed the Processus Contra Templarios sealed those boxes. The most documented real solution to this dilemma is the Erelson Archives in Germany, holding over 30 million documents on Nazi persecution. The archives were placed under an International Tracing Service Commission. No single government held unilateral control. Access was granted to survivors and their descendants directly, bypassing state gatekeepers entirely. In 2019, the archives moved to fully open access. This solution has a name in modern information ethics: distributed custodianship. No single party holds complete access. The knowledge is preserved, but its release requires consensus, a structural check on both suppression and reckless disclosure. Enforcement against archives has real documented precedent. After the Soviet occupation of Lithuania in 1940, the NKVD issued formal confiscation orders for state archives containing records of pre-Soviet governance and genealogical documentation. Officials who had managed those archives were arrested. The records were transferred to Moscow. Some have never been returned. This is the deeper truth about forbidden knowledge. Suppression doesn't eliminate information, it pressurizes it. The longer a truth is contained, the more violently it tends to re-emerge, and the less control anyone has over the context of its release. When the Stasi archives were opened in 1991, after East Germany's collapse, they contained 111 kilometers of documents, records so voluminous that archivists estimated it would take 500 years to fully process them. Suppression hadn't erased the past, it had stored it. Archivists have also used their custody to protect the living. During the Nazi occupation of Vilnius, scholars at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research concealed genealogical records and family documentation that would have allowed Nazi authorities to identify Jewish families. They hid the records inside the walls of the building itself. Some of those records survived the war. The families named in them, in many cases, did not, but the documentation of their existence did. In 2019, the Erelson Archives made a decision that reframes what an archivist actually is. After 70 years of restricted access, they opened their full holdings to any researcher, survivor, or descendant who requested them, not because the danger had disappeared, but because the calculus had shifted. The harm of continued suppression now outweighed the harm of disclosure. That's not a gatekeeper's choice. Suppressed documents have a way of outlasting the systems that suppress them. Lenin's testament, written in 1922 and recommending Stalin's removal from power, was classified by the Soviet leadership and hidden for over 30 years. When Khrushchev finally read it aloud in his 1956 secret speech, it didn't just expose Stalin. It delegitimized the entire succession that had followed him, triggering the largest internal crisis the Soviet system had faced since the revolution. When the conditions finally change, archives open. In 2012, the Vatican fully opened the archives of the Second Vatican Council. Documents from the 1960s that had been restricted for decades. In 2020, Pope Francis opened the archives of Pope Pius XII's entire pontificate, including the Holocaust-era correspondence. The truth was finally safe to be true, not because the Church had changed its position, but because the living witnesses who could be harmed by it were gone. Right now, in real archives across the world, this exact argument is happening. The United States National Archives holds millions of classified pages. The British Public Records Office restricts certain files for 75 years. Every sealed vault is a version of the same dilemma. Who decides when the danger has passed, and by what authority? In 2017, the National Archives was legally required to release the remaining classified JFK assassination records, documents over 50 years old. The CIA successfully lobbied for continued redactions, citing the protection of living intelligence sources. Some of those sources would be in their 90s. The argument was accepted. The question of who decides when the danger has passed was answered in that case by the agency whose own conduct the documents described. The next time a government invokes a 75-year classification rule, ask what living interest that timeline is actually protecting, and whose. The Processus contra Templarios waited 700 years. The Pentagon Papers waited 4. The Stasi files were opened within a year. The difference wasn't the danger of the documents, it was the power of the institutions holding them.